You've actually done work with a lot of districts, intensive work all over the country looking at all this. So can you start by telling us, what do you see as the state of things from your point of view?
Well, I guess one of the things as I was thinking about starting is when I worked at the Department of Education in Colorado as the state consultant, I just remember the joyful days of someone calling me and saying, we finally have one computer in the building and we're going to have a K-8 curriculum for typing. And they were very excited to take that one machine and make this big curriculum plan. And we've worked years and years to have the kind of access and connectivity that we experience in schools today. So now that we've put that energy into it, we are now at a different place of conversation. And the first slide that I have coming up is a question that I often ask groups. What is it, if you spend the money and you spend the time and all of the system effort and the personal effort to have it, what is it that you want technology to accelerate? So it accelerates something. That's a comment from Jim Collins. And so asking people, what is their it? I might ask them, what's the most inspiring use of technology for learning in kids that you've ever seen? And the good news is you can go in any school district, any place, anywhere, and really find those exemplar examples where technology has really made a difference for students. But right now, what we're looking at is not are those individual things there, but how pervasive is it? So as people identify the things that they feel has been magic with the technology, and they're always there, we start to ask, what's the percentage of students who are able to have that kind of experience that you're talking about? So Rogers' Diffusion of Innovations talks about the difference between the percentages that represent trailblazers and the percentages that you would expect if anything was identified as a pervasive use, which is about 85%. What you'll notice in the middle of the screen is sort of a representation that today, as we think about ourselves being a cross-generation of moving schools the way they've always been into this new place, that there's a lot of conversation, I think technology is that treasure. It is that secret ingredient that we're able to shape and make more happen. But we're not going to get past trailblazer numbers as long as technology use is left optional. And that means that teachers have to be in the mood or not in the mood or could be in the mood. The transition point is administrators. So the group that's called settlers, moving into about 50% of the system, doing anything specific that you think's worth the time and dime, is highly dependent on the administrators and leaders in a district. So right now, with the initiative of the ISTE Net Standards for Administrators, it's just the right timing to begin to talk about how do we help administrators get very congruent and take on the leadership of moving visions into practice for all students, not just letting the good things happen for a small group. So that's what I've been seeing, is dealing with optional and dealing with the next layer of change that's needed that highly engages our leaders in those conversations.
Well, you know, you've been doing this tech planning and these technology impact studies for what, 20 years? So what do you see that helps schools organize that their implementation really does gather more results?
Well, I think in the beginning, most of our tech plans were purchase orders. They were shopping lists. And when the federal money came out, people said, well, it can't just be about shopping. We want to talk about what is the connections to learning. What do we want to have happen for that? So we had a lot of people working the midnight hour, usually technology leaders, trying to get the grants written. And what they would do is use these words like enhancing and enriching or integrating across the curriculum, which to me sounded like great words until I had to start doing the evaluation programs. So one of the things in looking at the goals is to notice the difference between a goal that's about the stuff and the adults versus goals that are about results for students. So I want to just say to teachers and administrators and families in the communities, what's the story that you're telling about your technology uses. And whatever that story is that the story that you wanted to buy for your students? So I have a cartoon on the slide that's a sheep in the woods being chased by a wolf in the woods. And they got a grant. So they bought themselves some technology. And when you look at this story, you can see the cars zooming even in the flat screen and moving around. But if you squint past the technology, do you have a new story, or do you just have a more expensive story that existed without spending that money? Mm-hmm. Because what we're really looking for is what stories are you able to tell that you wouldn't be able to tell if you didn't have those kind of tools? At this time, and I think always, when money is tight and we're having to make tough decisions, people really want to understand what's the added value. What are we getting that we couldn't have without spending this money? So we have this window of time and still have it to create these incredible stories. And at the end of the day, what we say to people is, what are the stories you're telling, and is that the story that you want to keep funding? Because this wolf and sheep have to go out and get a new sponsor when this technology becomes obsolete. And that's the first question the sponsor is going to answer is, why would we fund you again? So I think that's the conversation. The next slide talks about defining integration. I know like enriching and enhancing seem like the right words, and out of respect for our colleagues, those of us who were on the grant writing and the planning, we didn't want to tromp into their territory. So out of courtesy, we didn't get prescriptive. And using words like enriching and enhancing says, well, it's about learning, but you decide. Because I don't know if you mean you want 2 enrichings and 3 enhancings or 3 each. But what happens is you end up, when you walk around the buildings and try to figure out what it is, you end up counting who's using the technology. And the same thing with integrating. It pretty much means do something, do anything, just use it. And then the only way we can talk about the added value is how many people are doing it and how many using it that they're doing. So that conversation sort of led me to the next piece, that something I've used for over 20 years, whether it's been technology planning, staff development design. I've done about 2,300 school districts impact reports, and it's keeping the eye on what's the category of use of technology that you have. And these 3 uses came from like ACOT studies and the diffusion of innovations, but I simplified them into 3 categories so that we could sort them instructionally. The first one is really about literacy, and it means the literacy, the knowingness of technology. That the stories you tell are about kids doing podcasts, kids knowing how to use PowerPoint, or kids using and practicing the tools. So I'll go to a principal and say, what's the most inspiring thing that you've seen? And they'll say, all the kids do PowerPoint. And what I hear is a technology story in my ear. And I said, well, what are they doing with PowerPoint? And he says, well, I don't know, but they're all doing it. Everybody loves it. You'll see that there's a picture of the tools there and the word knots. And I'm going to come back to the knots, lots, and hots, because that's kind of the final summary. So once we connect the technology to the curriculum, we're in either 2 categories, the adapting or the transforming. And the yellow zone is the adapting. And I've got a sheep theme going on here, so imagine those sheep crunching on there. But the traditional role of school for many, many years is for kids to be information consumers. That we have a body of knowledge that we want them to know. We organize for them to know it. And then they give it back to us and they get their grade based on that. So that information consumption is lower order thinking skills. It's Bloom's taxonomy of kids being able to receive information and give it back. Well, for about the last, 15, 20 years, we've talked about a set of skills in which kids have to be more than consumers. So in the transforming category, what you have is kids being information producers, that they have to work on real-life problems, go beyond the existing information and make sense of the world, make sense of the information, collaborate with others, reach outside their schools. In that category of transforming, you really have kids being creators. So if we are looking at the 3 categories from an instructional point of view, in the literacy category, curriculum is not the point. And I'll see projects in which the information's superficial. It's barely there because the point was to do the technology.